Startups, high growth and turnaround mandates, private and public company environments, business to business and business to customer, and business to business customer market models, device hardware, client-side software, server-side software products, M&A transactions, managing all elements of a business to profit and loss goals, to well-run operating entities. He's an expert in business development, marketing, branding, product management, and finance. He has an MBA degree from the Richard Ivey School of Business at the University of Western Ontario. So please welcome Lou.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the chance to talk to you today. As it's been explained to me, one of the roles of this next 30 minutes is to give a bit of an introduction to the non-traditional industries and their hiring views in the Calgary environment. So to do that, I thought I'd set the table a little bit by giving you just a brief introduction to what we do. I'm going to try and limit that to 2 or 3 minutes. But it'll give you a sense of the kind of work that we do for when I give you my impressions and my views on what hiring looks like for us. It might make a little bit more sense. So in that context, a little bit about Orbix. So Orbix was started back in 2010 by a plastic surgery resident at the Foothills Hospital who was noticing that with disturbing regularity there were patients coming in for amputations related to diabetic foot ulcers and the progressive conditions that result from those, diabetic foot ulcers specifically. So she left her residency, started the company, and the company essentially has built a platform for delivering wearable technology in a medical device context for combating chronic disease or managing chronic diseases. And the first of those diseases is, of course, diabetic foot ulcers specifically, which is a problem that I think touches. I'll guarantee you that there's somebody that everybody in this room knows that has struggled with this in one way or another, and maybe not even realize that that's exactly what we're talking about. One of the effects of diabetes, over time, is that it erodes the nerve endings. You end up with what's called peripheral neuropathy. It starts off as a tingling, and then eventually in your feet you lose sensation. And when you can't feel your feet, what happens is you end up wearing holes in your feet like you would a sock. The normal subconscious movement that everybody's going to do here over the next 30 minutes and shuffle their feet and move them around when they become a little bit uncomfortable is in fact your body's way of relieving the very light pressure that's necessary to cut off the circulation to your tissue. And if you don't relieve that pressure, you don't offload that pressure, then it kills the tissue, wears a hole, you end up with these very ugly sores that come and come again and don't ever go away, and do end up in eventually progressing from ulceration to amputation. So it's a terrible problem. It affects actually, as diabetes grows, it affects more and more people over time. Right now it's 8% of North Americans are diabetic, 30% are pre-diabetic, and its numbers are 3 times as high in places like the Middle East. So it's a tremendous problem internationally, and 25% of diabetics over the course of their life will end up with a diabetic foot ulcer problem, and a surprising number of those will end up with an amputation. And it's an expensive problem. The other thing that this slide serves to do is sort of quantify that. The healthcare system, whether that be insurance payers or single payers like Alberta Health here in Alberta, they foot the bill, and it's in excess of 14, perhaps as much as $16 billion annually is the cost of just managing that problem. And I think we're relatively familiar. There was a lot of work done back in Princess Di's day about landmines and the issues that those create. Well, today there's a 30-minute cycle on average between somebody losing a limb from a landmine, but it's every 30 seconds in the world is a limb loss of diabetes. So it's a tremendous problem, and that's really what Dr. Everett did when she started the company, was to try and do that. What is the product? The product is a wearable footbed. It's not the shoe in this picture, but rather the thing sitting next to it that fits inside the shoe. It's about 0.5 millimeter in thickness, flexible. You don't notice it's in your shoe. It traces through a thin set of wires around to an electronic pod that sits on your laces. And that pod provides the power, it provides the computing, and it provides the wireless connection to an alerting device that you wear at your wrist. And that alerting device does the job that your brain can't when it can't feel your feet, and it tells you when you've had too much pressure for too long on a particular part of your foot, and the patient then moves their foot in reaction to that, and that prevents the ulcers from occurring. And that's essentially that's the meter. We have a number of other products that we've developed that are less far along. This is a a product that's legal for sale from Health Canada, the FDA in the States, and CE in Europe. But we have a version of this product that actually, instead of an alerting device, it connects to a back pad that provides sensation that allows the brain to remap. And we've proven in clinical trials, in about 3 weeks, the brain remaps itself to start to feel again parts of the body that have been lost through sensation through another part of the body. So that's another product we have, as well as some scientific measurement tools that we provide. That's in essence, it all works today, and it's all cloud-based software that we provide that allows the patient and their doctor to track how they're doing and monitor and cut problems off before they even occur. That's essentially what the company is all about. My history, you heard a very clinical sort of history of it. I would summarize my career and my background as having been somebody that fell backwards into a career in the technology industry here in Calgary, starting off at what was then Alberta Government Telephones, to date myself a little bit, working in a 3-person department that was really struggling to get funding at the time, called Cellular. And eventually riding the wireless wave up, and from there, career in telecommunications, a couple of tours of duty at Northern Telecom, and through Northern Telecom, I was lucky enough to have the experience of being involved in some startups that they were funding, some joint ventures. So I got to collect a paycheck from Northern Telecom, but work in a startup a couple of times, and was involved also in the first commercial implementation of Java programming language, which was essentially, imagine an iPad in the form factor of a telephone that we built here in Calgary way back before anybody would ever want to buy one of those things. So that was my career, and eventually it evolved into a series of mandates where I led turnarounds of struggling companies with a bit of a different twist to it, and I'll relate why that's important to what the stories I'm going to tell you in a few minutes in a second. So that was kind of my career, and at the tail end of it, before I came on board with Orbix to sort of lead and help Dr. Everett with the scaling of this business and its operations, I spent 5 years working for a merchant bank out of Birmingham, Alabama, leading the mergers and acquisitions group as well as the operational consulting group or the turnaround group, and that's what I did for 5 years there, and saw a lot of companies that were either at the end of their success or really struggling in either of those camps. And got some great perspectives on what makes sense to hire and what kind of people makes what kind of sense in what context. So that's a little bit about me. So at Orbix, it's a small company. It's not a large venture. It's amazing in a Canadian context what you can achieve on very little money. We've raised to date about $3 million Canadian in sale of shares. We've leveraged a very, very lucrative or generous, I would say, grant and tax incentive structure that we have in Canada for early stage technology companies by about another $1.75 million, almost $2 million. So there's about $5 million that's gone into the company. We're always in the process of raising more money as we scale, but nevertheless, that's very little. And part of that is because the company itself is run very lean. We're a company of 12 and a fraction regular full-time people. We have, I think, 14 names on the org chart, but it works out to be the equivalent of 12 and a bit people in a regular full-time basis. And we hold steady at that pace over time. And as the company's focus has changed, we've done, I would say, I've been involved with the company now for just a little over 2 years directly. I was an advisor and an investor in the company before that. But I would say over the 5 years that the company has been in operations, it hasn't pivoted 90 degrees, but maybe there's been 15, 20 degree course corrections as it's gone along that a smaller size company is able to do adaptively in a way that a large company can't. So today, if you take a look at the way, if you were to construct a pie chart for how our staff is organized, we have about 40% are R&D or technical staff. And then split, the remaining 60% is split evenly between operations staff, sales and marketing staff, and sort of G&A overhead like me. That's kind of the remainder of how we're organized. And what we would normally do, and this is something that I would say has changed since the economic conditions in the market, the local market here have shifted. But we typically in technology companies, small startups, which is an under the hood, very vibrant group of companies and efforts that is quite varied. We have in Calgary, I'm a member of an organization called the A100, which is a group of we describe ourselves as the been there, done that technology entrepreneurs that live in Alberta today. To be a member, you have to have started, grown, and exited a technology company and be currently living in Alberta. So through my A100 involvement, what I've seen time and time again is that from a technical resource perspective, startups in the technology space, early stage companies in the technology space are rarely able to compete on the basis of salary and benefits with the dominant industry, the oil and gas sector for engineers here locally. However, what we are able to compete on and regularly do for high quality resources, high quality people, is on the basis of it being interesting work. And so what a typical career path that we would hire folks, we see it time and time again, is that engineers, technical staff in the oil patch will work for typically 2 to 3 years in a role that is mind-numbing for them, mind-numbingly boring, and then seek something more of a professional and satisfying challenge, be willing to sacrifice for a period of time on the salary and benefits and the immediate economic benefits of that, and then again for 2 or 3 years do something that's quite engaging, and then return back to the oil. So that oscillation to and fro is a fairly common pattern. Now, what's happened simply in the last year and a half is that we see there's been the oscillation, rather than being an ebb and a flow, sort of a regular tidal effect there. It's actually we've had a large scale exit. There's the market is much more of a buyer's market for the startup company today than it once was. But I think that for anyone that's looking for a position that has those kinds of skills, it's a remarkable opportunity, a remarkable time to be finding work that is challenging and interesting, and maybe not feel so guilty about taking home less in terms of pay as a result of that. What we look for, and to give you a sense of what, and I'm going to use us as an example, although I don't know that we're indicative in every way, but there are a number of things that we would look for in hiring, and it is generally. I'm going to say this as a preface to the following series of comments. I would suspect that the prejudices that we would hold with regard to the kinds of people that we look for and the kinds of skills that we recruit are not entirely intuitive for somebody that hasn't actually been in that environment before. The first is that in the earliest stages, startups and early stage technology companies, or I'd say non-traditional economy companies here in Calgary, are inclined toward hiring generalists, and that relates to the comment I made earlier about being able to pivot or course correct over the course of years. Hiring people that are with a strong work ethic. The comment is often that, or the description is often that we want to hire people that think like owners, not like employees. When they are greeted with challenges or problems, which there are many of on a day-to-day basis, they address them as if it matters to them in the way that it would for the people that own the business, because in large part they will own a large element of the business through stock options, which is a common incentive tool, and I would say sort of a universal incentive tool in the technology space. So thinking like owners, not thinking like employees, and being generalists is generally the way it works. Now, as a company scales, sorry, I told you I was going to do that. As a company scales over the course of years, that generalist profile of the kind of employee that's hired gives way to greater specialization. So as the company stabilizes, as the business model gels, as it gains traction and it knows what direction it needs to drive fast toward or in, that's at the point where the hiring practice and the composition of the employee base tends to go from being varied and driven and highly motivated staff to folks that are specialized, hopefully driven as well, but also coming from a background or having a skill set that is much more efficient in terms of its employment against the tasks at hand. So that's the first change that happens in the history of a company, is you move from a generalist profile, universally generalist profile, to increasingly specialist types of skill sets inside a company. The second is that it's, again, because money is scarce, capital is scarce, it's, for all of the wealth that exists in this town, it's rarely pointed toward the technology community for investment. And understandably so. I mean, that comes off sounding a little bitter, it's not meant to be, but the reality is that people invest in things they understand, and so if that wealth is being generated in businesses that are not technology oriented, it's difficult to get somebody to take a chance on a business that they don't have a good feel for. And as a result, it's difficult to extract that. So there's always a scarcity of capital for the early stage technology business. That's particularly true of things that are even like in the class structure of the early stage technology business. Hardware's at the bottom. It's we're the redheaded cousins of the technology industry. Even in the spectrum of redheadedness that happens in being technology in an oil and gas town. And that's simply because hardware, when you develop hardware, there are big costs that you have to sink into that development that you can't pivot quickly and make changes to. You make a mistake in software, particularly cloud-based software, and you find a bug, you can correct that, deploy it overnight, and everybody's got something that's fixed. You make that kind of mistake in hardware, and it's expensive. So it's generally viewed as a higher risk, less attractive kind of space to invest in hardware as a group. But nevertheless, capital, my point was going to be that capital itself is scarce, and so as a result you tend to use it sparingly, and you tend to hire the best you can get away with hiring for the least amount of money you have to draw. So that skews the employee base in the early days in these technology companies to the more junior staff members, so people that may not have a lot of experience at all, even generalist experience. They tend to have not a lot of it, but they tend to have to get up and go, and you make do, and if you're in a role like mine, you do a lot of teaching. There's a lot of employee growth, a lot of culture, the culture of trying to foster that, and that tends to be the earlier stage stuff, but as a company matures, it can, and again, as the business model gels, it can move not only towards specialists, as I mentioned before, but also more senior folks that have a greater amount of experience and can be brought to bear as the company feels it's able to confidently invest in that kind of resource. And then the other thing that happens, and again, this is perhaps all of these things go hand in hand. In the early days, it is almost an exclusively local workforce, people that you can pile into a garage somewhere in town here, that it becomes increasingly diversified over time. So as you're able to, and again, as that business model gels, as the business comes into focus, you can then start to communicate that remotely to people and have them run in a direction to help the company out without fear that they're going to be running at 45 degrees from what the business actually needs because they're not there in the office with everybody else. So that I think is instructive. That kind of evolution is instructive in terms of how you might, if you were in the process of looking for a position or something along those lines in that kind of company, I think it helps to focus where your comfort might be or where your skill sets might be in the spectrum of technology companies that exist in town today. There is, as you would expect, there are gobs and gobs and gobs of little startup companies that aren't paying anybody because they don't have money yet. At one end of the spectrum, and then there are more mature companies at the other end of the spectrum. So I think the remaining large employer in the technology space in Calgary today is Smart Technologies, but there are others that are up and comers, a company with which I've been involved for a number of years. Benevity Social Ventures is an enterprise software company that provides benefits tools for large employers, and their customers are Google and Microsoft and Apple and all of those types of they've grown like a weed, and then there goes sort of Benevity sort of in between the two ends of that spectrum, and then you have the smaller companies at the other end. And as they move up that chain, it changes the nature of the profile of the type of person they're after, and I think represents or presents a different type of challenge or opportunity for what someone's personal appetites might be for what they'd be willing to or interested in pursuing. The other point that I'll make with respect to how we look at it is, again, when you have a very small team, so again, like I said, 14 names on a work chart for us today, it is remarkably important that you have a cohesive cultural environment. So there is a culture tends to trump skills in that regard. If somebody looks like they'll fit in and be a cohesive member of the team and not disruptive to the team, which is incredibly damaging when you're trying to be agile and working in a smaller company environment, culture will trump that, and it'll be more important to hire somebody that everyone can work with and makes the team more productive than less. That's been borne out. When I joined Orbix just 2 years ago, there was a bit of a cultural drift going on within the company, and the first 6 months of my time there was really trying to repair that and getting the poison out is the turnaround term for that. When you eliminate those people or ask those people to leave who are not a good fit and disruptive to the rest of the team, that was a sort of a 6-month process at the beginning of my time at Orbix, and I'm proud to say that I think that we've got a fantastic team today, a team that regularly, I mean, this is something that surprises people on a regular basis, but we have an employee base today at Orbix that's so committed to the future of the company that they're actually taking their salaries, or portions of their salaries rather, on a universal, this is the entire staff, portions of their salaries and lending it back to the company when we have dips in the cash flow. So it's that level of commitment that is the ideal, I think, for how you recruit, and that comes as a result of being a cohesive and strong culture. As we sort of going into today, and sort of the last point I'll make on this list is to say that the one thing that, and this surprises, when I've told this to others in the past, it's been met with some measure of surprise. So it may be met that way today, but we will often hire someone in with fewer skills than we would prefer, or relative to another candidate, if the other candidate is coming to the table with what we refer to, or what is generally referred to as a big company mindset. So I've had the experience in many of the turnarounds that I've run, in my experience at the merchant bank, to discover that it's often a mistake for the early stage or the growth stage technology company to hire somebody in who has a wonderful pedigree and whose resume speaks to tremendous success in the context of a large company, and not appreciate the challenges that person will be met with to try and operate where they don't have somebody to do their PowerPoints for them, right? Where there isn't somebody that can give them that kind of support, or has an expectation that is out of line with what the resources or the capabilities of the company are. And in fact, that ends up being the single most disruptive, single greatest source of disruption, I'll say, in the way in which a company grows, is to have too many of the big company mindsets polluting the small company environment. So a suggestion to anyone that's considering this kind of environment or this type of company to come in with, I think you need to do a gut check with yourself, make sure you're not guilty of that kind of thinking when you arrive at the doorstep, because you'll find yourself on that doorstep in the other direction within months, I'm sure, because you just won't be a fit there. I don't know if it's within the context of the format here, but I'm happy to take 5 or 10 minutes worth of questions if there are any, and no harm, no foul if I'm bored to tears and you're just waking up now. So if there's any questions, anything that anybody wants to ask, I'll take that. Yes.
I come from a very similar background, with smaller companies, startups, a lot of ongoing technology and things like that, and it is a very different environment. And I've been unemployed for quite some time, and I've really struggled to find companies like that.
So the question, I'll parrot it back to you in case everyone couldn't hear. So having come from a similar environment in the technology space, you found that it's been a struggle to find companies like them. What kind do you mean?
Well, everything you're saying, there's a certain type of culture. There's a certain requirement for multiple skill sets. Like you said, when you do hire, you don't necessarily want all the skills, because people get very focused in a certain direction, and you need the thought processes to be outside the box. And I'm finding it very difficult with the oil and gas culture that people are looking for something very specific. They want someone to do their PowerPoint presentation, and it's hard to find companies, let alone people, that are able to have that working.
Well, I mean, good resources, so I think that's an interesting dilemma, and it certainly makes sense to me that you've experienced that. I mean, my comments on that would be as follows, that there is certainly, well, 2 points. The first, I think there's a spectrum of self-awareness and behavior on the part of the technology community in the same way there would be within it. So there are in the early stage technology space and the technology space in general in this town, there are employers that I would consider to be innovative and right-minded, and others that are slow-paced, slow, and a little bit have the blinders on. So there's that spectrum exists in any market. Second comment I would make is that the unfortunate effect of it being a buyer's market for the employer today is that they have the luxury of being more selective. And if in their minds that, or if in their personal interpretation of selectivity drives you towards specialization as opposed to generalization, then yes, you're going to find that that's a second order effect of the sheer number of people that are available to hire today compared to what was the case even 18 months ago. But what I would suggest to you in terms of places to go look, there are a number of resources that I point you towards. So in Calgary here, there are a couple of organizations that support the technology community. So the first is Innovate Calgary, which is associated with the university and with the city of Calgary, has an office up by the University of Calgary's research park. That's one. They see as their clients the early stage technology companies in town, and those clients, that client list is something that they're happy to advertise. That's a first of all is a good place to start. The other is that more of a grassroots organization that's down in our neck of the woods in Inglewood is Startup Calgary. And Startup Calgary is a much more looser, but it's an organization that's constituted entirely of startups themselves and the entrepreneurs that have started companies wanting to provide services and support to each other. And those are the two, I would say, formal organizations. And the final comment that comes to mind from your question is something that perhaps I glossed over in my prepared comments, and that was that unfortunately, one of the things that carries a tremendous amount of weight, I don't know if it's unfortunate, but realistically, one of the things that carries a tremendous amount of weight in the decision to hire somebody is the recommendation of a trusted source. So, given the choice between two seemingly qualified individuals, if one of them is somebody I trust has told me I should hire, that's going to win the day. And so that I think means that leveraging your network and getting as many people as you can to recommend you is going to be probably the most efficient way to get into that kind of environment. Yes, sir. And just before you ask your question, I'm going to ask one of myself. So, who's going to tell me when I'm out of town? Who's going to?
Your company, Calgary. So, what kind of people are you looking for now? So, do you need some business or marketing, people try to get more funding, because now maybe the most important part is try to get enough donation or funding from for the investment, right?
Right. Well, so that's an interesting question. And I won't go on at length about it, but I'll say that we're at the stage now of having we're post-product in technology. We're post-product, meaning that the principal development is done. We have something that works and is available for sale. In order for us to scale our business as a medical device, unfortunately, that means that you have to convince insurance companies, whether it's payer like Alberta Health Services here or whether it's in the States, a much more complicated environment for health services. You have to get private and public insurers to pay for a device in order for it to be adopted widely. And to convince payers to adopt, what you need to do is you need to do all sorts of clinical trial work to give them scientific evidence that, in fact, if they were to pay for one of these devices on one of their insured parties, that good things would happen. So we're in the process of doing that. We're, as I described before, if you see the evolution of a company through the beginning to the end, and that gelling of the business plan, and that move from generalization to specialization, we're at the beginning of that cycle right now. The resources that we have, the people that we have on board now, the team is very strong. I would say broadly generalist in most respects. And the skill sets we're missing now, we're finding, are ones that are very specific. So key hires for us in the next 12 months are really two. The first is we need a senior person who has managed clinical trial work before in a medical device context. We've done very well for 5 years in learning as we go, training ourselves in that regard. But at this time, given our druthers, we'd like to find somebody that would be able to bring their experience to bear, and making sure that we don't make stupid mistakes going forward. And the second is, again, a little bit more of a specialized resource, is as we begin the next 2 years of effort to get the clinical trial data necessary to make the case to those insurers, we need to begin to recruit those insurers and make them fans of the product before it's something that they would be available, or make them willing to reimburse for it. And so we have it's a business development resource, broad skill set, generalized skill set. But again, we are at a point in our evolution that we would become more particular, and would very much prefer to find somebody who had dealt with those kinds of individuals before, knew who to reach out to, which ones to avoid, that kind of stuff. Again, to save us the trouble of learning those mistakes on our own time. So we've evolved to a point now where we're starting to tip over into adding to the team in a more specialized way and away from the generalized way that would have been the case in the first 5 years of the company's life. The final point I'll make on that is that that's also because we have, of course, our business plan calls for, we're at 14 today, we'll be at 18 3 years from now. Like, we're not growing like gangbusters. We have a job to do with this clinical trial work over the next few years, and then at that point in time, it'll be a different business entirely, and we'll see where it takes us at that. One more question. This gentleman here.
So where exactly is your business in, because you are going to go for clinical trials? How long is it going to be taking to get into new markets? Because I'm more interested in that.
Well, we have the question is really what does that clinical trial cycle look like? Well, they're overlaid. So it's not our very first clinical trials, to be clear. This is a new set of clinical trials. We've done 1, 2, 3 pilot studies through the University of Arizona. They have a cutely named, a cleverly named part of the medical school at the University of Arizona. It's the Southern Arizona Limb Salvage Alliance, SALSA. So SALSA is the group that's done 3 pilot studies for us. That's what allowed us to get to the point where we were given a check mark and allowed for sale by the FDA in the U.S. That is combined with a clinical trial, a randomized clinical trial that's taking place today in the UK. And why the UK? Well, this gives you a bit of an insight into the way that a small company makes its decisions. Diabetes UK had some grant money and was willing to give it to a UK-based university to run a trial. So guess where our trial ended up. So without having to pay for that trial ourselves, that first RCT is midstream today and showing remarkably a 76% reduction in ulceration between the active and control groups. Just to give you a sense, the expectation was 20 to 30, so we're blowing the doors off it right now in terms of performance in the study. But what we need to do next is add a few other claims to what we think will be necessary in order to be a reimbursable product. And to make those claims, we need to test for different things. And so we have a second RCT, randomized clinical trial, that's going to spin up here sometime in the next 4 months. And it'll be a multi-site trial in the US, which the FDA prefers, because somehow British feet are different than American feet. But anyway, that's what we're in the middle of doing. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. So thank you very much.